Chapter 13 of the Enchanted Barn. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Reading by Gail Mattern. The Enchanted Barn by Grace Livingston Hill. Chapter 13. It was beautiful to wake the next morning with the birds singing a matin in the trees, and a wonderful Sabbath quiet over everything. Tired out as she was, and worn with excitement and care, Shirley was the first to waken, and she lay there quiet beside Carol for a little while with her eyes closed, listening and saying a prayer of thanksgiving for the peace of the place and the wonder that it had come into her life. Then suddenly a strange luminousness about her simply forced her to open her eyes. The eastern window was across the room from her bed, and the sky was rosy with the dawn and flooding the room. It was the first time in years she had watched the sun rise. She had almost forgotten in the little dark city house that there was a sun to rise and make things glorious. The sun had seemed an enemy to burn and wilt and stifle. But now here was a friend, a radiant new friend to be waited for and enjoyed, to give glory to all their lives. She raised herself on one elbow and watched until the red ball had risen and burst into the brightness of day. Then she lay down softly again and listened to the birds. They seemed to be mad with joy over the new day. Presently the chorus grew less and less. The birds had gone about their morning tasks, and only a single bright song now and then from some soloist in the big tree overhead marked the sweet scented silence of the morning. In the quiet Shirley lay and went over events since she had first seen this spot and taken the idea of living in the barn. Her heart gave thanks anew that her mother had not disliked it as she had feared. There was no sense that it was a stable, no odor of living creatures having occupied it before, only sweet dusty clover, like a lingering of past things put away carefully. It was like a great camping expedition. And then all those flowers! The scent of the lilies was on the air. How lovely of the young girl out of her luxury to think to pass on some of the sweet things of life! And the gracious, chivalrous man, her brother! She must not let him think she would presume upon his kindness. She must not let even her thoughts cross the line and dwell on the ground of social equality. She knew where he belonged, and there he should stay for all her. She was heart free and happy, and only too glad to have such a kind landlord. She drifted off to sleep again, and it was late when she awoke the next time. A silvery bell from the little white church in the valley was ringing and echoing distantly. Sabbath, real Sabbath, seemed brooding happily in the very air. Shirley got up and dressed hastily. She felt as if she had already lost too much of this first wonderful day in the country. A thrush was spilling his liquid notes in the tree overhead when she tiptoed softly into her mother's room. Doris opened her eyes and looked in wonder, then whispered softly, "What is that, Shirley? What is that pretty sound?" "A birdie in the tree, dearie," whispered Shirley. "A real birdie? I want to see it. Take Doris up, Shirley." So Shirley lifted the little maiden, wrapped a shawl about her, and carried her softly to the window, where she looked up in wonder and joy. The boys came tumbling down from their loft in a few minutes, and there was no more sleep to be had. Carol was up and out, and the voice of one or the other of them was continually raised in a shout of triumph over some new delight. "I saw a fish in the brook!" shouted Harley under his mother's window. "It was only a little fellow, but maybe it'll grow bigger some day, and then we can fish." "You silly!" cried George. "It was a minnow. Minnows don't grow to be big. They're only good for bait." "Hush, George! There's a nest in the big tree. I've been watching, and the mother bird is sitting on it. That was the father bird singing a while ago." This from Carol. George, Harley, and Carol declared their intention of going to church. That had likely been the first bell that rang, their mother told them, and they would have plenty of time to get there if they hurried. It was only 9:30. Country churches rang a bell then, and another at 10, and the final bell at 10:30, probably. Possibly they had Sunday school at 10. Anyhow, they could go and find out. It wouldn't matter if they were a little late the first time. So they ate some breakfast in a hurry, took each a sandwich left from the night before, crossed the road, climbed the fence, and went joyously over the green fields to church, thinking how much nicer it was than walking down a brick paved street past the same old grimy houses to a dim, artificially lighted church. Shirley took a survey of the larder, decided that roast chicken, potato croquettes, and peas would all warm up quickly, and as there was plenty of ice cream left and some cakes, they would fare royally without any work. So she sat beside her mother and told the whole story of her ride, the finding of the barn, her visit to the Graham office, and all that transpired until the present time. The mother listened, watching her child, but said no word of her inner thoughts. If it occurred to her that her oldest daughter was fair to look upon, and that her winning ways, sweet, unspoiled face, and wistful eyes had somewhat to do with the price of their summer's abode, it would be no wonder. But she did not mean to trouble her child further. She would investigate for herself when opportunity offered. So she quieted all anxieties Shirley might have had about her sanction of their selection of a home, kissed Shirley, and told her she felt it in her bones she was going to get well right away. And indeed there was much in the fact of the lifting of the burden of anxiety concerning where they should live that went to brighten the eyes of the invalid and strengthen her heart. When the children came home from church, Shirley was putting dinner on the table, and her mother was arrayed in a pretty kimono, a relic of their better days, and ready to be helped to the couch and wheeled out to the dining room. It had been pleasant to see the children coming across the green meadow in the distance, and get things all ready for them when they rushed in hungry. Shirley was so happy she felt like crying. After the dinner things were washed, they shoved the couch into the living room among the flowers where George had built up a beautiful fire, for it was still chilly. The children gathered around their mother and talked, making plans for the summer, telling about the service they had attended, chattering like so many magpies. The mother lay and watched them and was content. Sometimes her eyes would search the dim, mellow rafters overhead and glance along the stone walls, and she would say to herself, "This is a barn. I am living in a barn. My husband's children have come to this, that they have no place to live but a barn." She was testing herself to see if the thought hurt her, but looking on their happy faces, somehow she could not feel sad. "Children," she said suddenly in one of the little lulls of conversation, "do you realize that Christ was born in a stable? It isn't so bad to live in a barn. We ought to be very thankful for this great, splendid one." "Oh, mother dear, it is so beautiful of you to take it that way!" cried Shirley with tears in her eyes. "Doris, you sing your little song about Jesus in the stable," said Carol. "I'll play it for you." Doris, nothing loath, got a little stool, stood up beside her mother's couch, folded her small hands demurely, and began to sing without waiting for accompaniment. "Away in a manger, no trip for his head, the little Lord Jesus lay down his sweet head. The stars in the heaven looked down where he lay, the little Lord Jesus asleep in the hay. The cattle are lowing, the poor baby waits, but the little Lord Jesus no crying he mates. I love thee, Lord Jesus, look down from the sky and stay by my crib, watching my lullaby." Shirley kissed Doris, and then they began to sing other things, all standing around the piano. By and by that distant bell from the valley called again. "There's a vesper service at 5 o'clock. Why don't you go, Shirley? You and George and Harley," said Carol. "Me want to do too," declared Doris earnestly, and it was finally decided that the walk would not be too long, so the boys, Shirley, and the baby started off across the fields while Carol stayed with her mother. And this time Mrs. Hollister heard all about Elizabeth, and how she wanted Carol to come and see her sometime. Heard, too, about the proposed dance and its quiet squelching by the brother. Heard and looked thoughtful, and wondered more. "Mother is afraid they are not quite our kind of people, dear," she said gently. "You mustn't get your heart bound up in that girl. She may be very nice, but she's a society girl, and you are not, you know. It stands to reason she will have other interests pretty soon, and then you will be disappointed when she forgets all about you." "She won't forget, mother. I know she won't," declared Carol stoutly. "She's not that kind. She loves me. She told me so. She wanted to put one of her rings on my finger to bind our friendship, only I wouldn't let her till I had asked you, because I didn't have any but grandmother's to give her, and I couldn't give her that." "That was right, dear. You can't begin things like that. You would find a great many of them, and we haven't the money to keep up with a little girl who has been used to everything." Carol's face went down. Tears began to come in her eyes. "Can't we have even friends?" she said, turning her face away to hide the quiver in her lip.